Good afternoon, everyone from Portland, Oregon. Welcome to Spirion's classification webinar, the first in our tips and tricks series. We're giving everyone a couple more minutes to get in to make sure that they're getting past all of the other traffic that's on the internet. So if you can just give us 1 or 2 more minutes, we'll be right with you and get us started. All right, everyone. Hello and welcome to our classification webinar. So this is the first in our tips and tricks webinar series that is brought to you by Education Services here at Spirion. We're really excited about this. We've put a lot of time and effort into improving our services to our customers over the past several months, and this is our first webinar in that series that's coming through. We're going to be doing these tips and tricks webinar series at least once every 2 months. So the next one's going to be in June. And in it, we're going to cover some really important information about how we think you can use Sensitive Data Manager and other tools to improve your use of the tool and to improve the value that you get out of that tool. We're going to be bringing you experts to present all of these things to you, and we're very interested in your input. What kind of webinars would you like to see? What kind of topics would you like covered? We will send out a survey after this, and you'll have an opportunity to tell us what you're interested in so that we can bring that to you in the future. One more slide, Kyle, and then it's going to be all yours. So to get us started today, I would like to introduce you to Kyle Butler, who is a professional services engineer here at Spirion. He's also a tech junkie. You might notice from some of these things. He's got a lot of programming languages under his belt, so he's really built that up. He's also a former customer success manager, so a number of you might have actually worked with him as your customer success manager. He is a credited author on one of our most recent patent filings for Spirion, and he also edits our Privacy Please Flipboard magazine. And on a personal note, I've been at Spirion for just over 5 months now, and Kyle and I have had way too little opportunity to goob about our own comic book collections. So be careful about asking questions about, say, Batman, because we may never get on to the subject again. And with that, Kyle, I'm going to turn it back over to you and let you take the webinar away.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Sandra, for the introduction. Once again, I'm Kyle, and I'm going to be walking you guys through our classifications. So to start off with, we're going to go through, here's a short agenda, and I promise this won't be a death by PowerPoint presentation for you. So what we're going to be doing is I'm going to give you some brief recommendations as you begin the process of implementing classification into your Spirion instance. And we're going to cover some of the common pitfalls and mistakes that I see our current clients making. We're also going to discuss some of the limitations of our classification ability. And also, I'm going to be doing a live demonstration. So we're going to take all of the things that we're going to cover right now, and I'm going to show you how to actually do it in the platform. And during that time, you are also welcome to ask questions or provide feedback and kind of help us drive this webinar forward. So starting off, we're going to go through some easy recommendations to kind of remember, and these are meant to be guidelines. At the end of the day, I am not a legal professional, so none of this is legal advice, but this is more so, and also this webinar is not really meant to be how to create a classification schema. This is going to be how to actually take the classification schemas that you have and implement it into Spirion. There's plenty of resources on the web where I would recommend you take a look at that will help you create classification schemas. And then we also have internal resources that I would recommend reaching out to your customer success manager if you'd like to learn more about. So here's my brief list of recommendations before you begin to classify using Spirion. The first one is to kiss your classification schema. So one of the important things is that you want to make sure that the classification schema that you come up with isn't too in-depth. And what I mean by that is like 50 layers deep. I've seen where somebody has so many different labels for so many different types of things that they're doing that the meanings of those labels become lost. So it's really important that when you're coming up with your classification schema that you are using things that terms that people understand and can relate to. And you have to think in the mindset of your average user, not necessarily for the security professionals who are on this call, like where you might be used to PCI DSS, CCPA, you know, NIST guidelines and things like that, you want to try to avoid using those as the labels, because although those may seem common to you, the whole point is you need to be able to explain this to somebody who maybe doesn't have a security background. So that would be my first tip, is to keep things short and simple. When you're doing your classification schema, the next thing is also to create a checklist. So what you typically have when you are looking at it like a classification schema is you'll have your highest level to the lowest level. And what you want to do while you're going through it is choose the data elements. And what I mean by that is like social security numbers, credit cards, personal addresses, telephone numbers. And you want to make a checklist saying, hey, I think that Spirion's got a built-in recognizer for this, or we might need to make a custom sensitive data definition to address this element. So while you're doing that, going through your classification schema, it's helpful to create a checklist so you kind of know what you are going to have to build in order to get that to work. And that brings me to my next point, which is to ensure that one of the things that I think that a lot of people forget is the ability to create sensitive data definitions, and that is our custom recognizers that allows you to layer any finds and things within that. I strongly encourage clients to leverage sensitive data definitions when they're designing their classification workflows. It'll help simplify the process. The next thing is to limit the scope. So I would start with, everybody usually wants to classify everything, but I would say start with classification. We allow for two different types of classification. One of them is on the results in the database, and the other one is persistent on the file itself. So changing the metadata, adding a little tag to it. I would say start small. You want to keep it to one department, and you want to start with just classifying the results in the database so you can validate the rules and filters that you set up in your workflows. It can be very tempting at the very beginning to try to jump all the way ahead to remediation, but we recommend at the beginning that you would start with just classifying the results in the database, get comfortable with that, and then once you're comfortable with that, then move out to files, and then move out to possible remediation steps. And then my last point is test, and then test some more. Understand that this is going to be a living, breathing project for you, and there will have to be adjustments along the way. And so it's important that you approach classification as a journey, not necessarily a destination. You want to make sure that you're validating and rolling it out slowly and doing the work at the beginning rather than having to go back and duplicate a bunch of work because it wasn't right the first time. So it's going to bring me to the next slide. And some of the common pitfalls and mistakes that I've seen is boiling the ocean, which is kind of relates to the last points that I was making before, but try not to boil the ocean. Choose a few initiatives that are important to your organization. It can be daunting when you're looking at it as like CCPA or PCI DSS or HIPAA. Try to focus on, prioritize which one's going to be the most important to get through first, and work on that one rather than trying to work on all three at the same time. You'll have a much greater chance of success. The other thing is analysis by or paralysis by analysis. So oftentimes I've heard when working with operators that they're kind of confused because they look at this gigantic classification schema and they're a little bit intimidated by trying to figure out how they're going to incorporate it all. So they say, you know, before we can do anything, I got to get with the business department and make sure this makes sense with them and try to get, I'd say, while that might be true if you were doing remediation actions, what I would recommend is not to do remediation actions first and to start with just the classifications in the database. And in that case, it's okay to do some experimentations. Try new things out as long as you're just classifying the results in the database. Don't be too shy on getting started with the project, because the biggest thing that can slow things down and lower your chances of success is not getting started early enough. If you have a lot of results in your database, it can be more difficult to do the classification than if you started at the beginning. So I strongly encourage testing, but testing early. The next point I have is not communicating or knowing the limits. So it's important that when you are explaining the capabilities of Spirion that you understand the places that you can apply classifications to and the places that you can't. And that you're communicating that with your other teams inside your business departments and other places so that they're aligned and understand what you're going to be able to do and what is not in scope and what is not able to be done. And we kind of touched on this next point, but jumping to remediation first is kind of a no-no. And using complex naming conventions, which we already covered. So I'm going to go ahead and skip to the next slide. So this one is meant to highlight some of the limitations of our classification engine. And although I think our classification engine is very powerful, it's important that you are able to understand this. So if we look in the classification column right here, you can see that files we can apply classification labels to on where an end user would be able to see it. If it says console, that means that you are able to do it on the results in the database. And the point is that with all these different types of locations, files, email, exchange, remote machines, we're always able to apply classifications in the console. There are some limitations to applying classifications to data that resides outside the console. So this is actually pulled from one of our support articles on classification. We'll make sure that we provide that link to you at the end of this webinar in case you have any questions. But we're going to go ahead and jump into the live portion of this, and I'm going to walk you through from the beginning how to implement classifications. So, and while I'm switching over, if anybody has any questions, please feel free to just enter them in the chat, and Sandra will prompt me and let me know. So, cool. So what you're looking at right now is just one of our VM environments. This is one of our demo environments. And what I'm going to be doing first is walking you through enabling classifications in the MSI. It's one of the important parts, and it's realizing that classification, if you want it to be visible to end users, it's important to understand this step. So we're going to go first off to my Spirion MSI builder. And in this, I'm not going to actually build an MSI, but I am going to show you the options that in our MSI builder that relate to classification and why they might be important for you. So on the first page, you're going to notice pretty much the basic MSI builder. On the advanced side, under advanced options, is where you're going to find settings that pertain to classification. So on the configure, so right here, the things that I would pay attention to if you are looking to classify data in your environment are the Explore integrations. So to explain these settings, the classification one in particular, is what this means is if you allow this setting to be placed in your MSI when you're building your custom MSI, it's going to allow your end users to interact with data that they see classified and change them. So if I go to the properties section, I'll always be able to see like classification and so forth. But if you allow your end users to have that, they're going to be able to change your classifications like so. So they can go like this. And really what this allows you to do is it allows this tag, the classification, to be visible to your end users. We can set something up in policy if you desire for your end users to be able to see the tag but not alter it. So just keep that in mind. If you want your end users to see the classifications that Spirion applies, then it's important that you check this box right here under the Explore integration. So taking that, we're going to go ahead and jump into the console, and I'll kind of show you some of the different policy settings that relate to classification and how they might be used and how you might implement them. So we're going to go log into our console, and I'll go ahead and log in. One of my favorite parts about classification before we go too far into this is that on your Spyglass dashboard or on reports, it really shows that you're making progress on your project. And it's something that you can definitely highlight, saying how many matches have been classified and whatnot. So it's a great way to show your leadership the value that you're bringing by working on the Spirion project. So we're going to
Kyle,
go to
as you're going into this, we have a question that actually directly relates to that. You just
yeah.
talked about changing classifications right there on a document. And the
Mhm.
question is, if an end user changes a classification on a document like you just showed, does that show up over here eventually in the spyglass and in other reporting?
Yes, it does. So the answer to that question is yes. The classification will report back to the console. So if end users are classifying things, as long as they've been searched by Spirion, then yes, that does get detected.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Great. Awesome. So we're going to go to policy settings, and what I'm going to be doing is going through some of the system policy settings that you want to keep in mind when you're starting your classification. So um, a rule of thumb is that we typically don't recommend, unless you've been advised by our support team or our professional services team, that you stray too far outside of having the 3 basic system policies. So what I would recommend is, if you're doing classifications, that you would modify these settings in your base system policy. Of course, I realize that there's a lot of different setups out there, and if your setting is specific to you or you have a question about that, feel free to shoot that question out. But I'm going to assume that you've implemented our professional services best practices policies and would operate accordingly. So I'm going to go to my base system policy, the one that is associated to all my endpoints. And we're going to go ahead and go to the settings section of the policy under settings. And this under actions is really where I'm going to spend the majority of my time focused for classification. So settings, actions under classification. And you can see I'm presented with a range of options. So the first one is apply the highest only. Typically, I don't ever really use that one, but I can see strong reasons for it. If you have classifications that should be like highly sensitive, and even if it's been classified, there's elements from other classifications in that, but you really want to make that the one that's visible and the one that is priority, you can enable that. This is the one where it allows your end users to edit the classification right here. So you can disable that, your end users, from being able to change the classification by double clicking on that setting and selecting prevent classification via add-ins. If you plan on doing classification on the file level, where Spirion's going to actually alter the metadata on the file itself and insert a little GUID into the alternative data stream, this is where you're going to do that. By default, this is meant to basically only classify within the console only, which means that the classifications are only going to show up on the results in the database. So if you'd like to do this on the file level, you would want to have this selected. Logging, this can be helpful when you're doing your search for the first time. If you're implementing classifications for the first time, I recommend that you do enable logging if you haven't had much experience with it. It can be very tricky in our platform to understand what's not possibly working right if the logging is not there. So just remember that after you're done testing, you would want to reset the setting. And the last one that I'm going to focus on is the remove manual during replace. So basically, if you felt like you wanted your end users to set their classifications, and that would be the override. I've seen a lot of clients who've done it that way, where they know that their classification workflow isn't perfect, and so they allow their end users to edit the classifications. And if they don't want it to be overwritten, they can set it to enable or disable, whichever one they choose. So there's that.
Great. Hey, Kyle, we already had a couple of questions based on just the little bit that you've shown us already.
All right.
The first question, I know that you mentioned that these are our recommendations. We have a question. I don't have anything named base system policy. Is there some way that I can get it?
That's a great question. So even if you don't have it named base system policy, typically in most environments, what you're going to find is that there's one of these system policies. And when I say system policies, what I mean is the policy type that has the little computer located at the bottom right-hand corner of the screen. So if you can see that, I'm circling it right here. This is different than the scheduled type test policies. The policy that you would want to modify is the one that would be associated to all endpoints if you have one in your environment. That's kind of
Oh,
a simplistic way of thinking about it. Go ahead.
okay. Oh, that's great. We'll see if that answers the question for them.
It could be, so I'll mention that it could be that you don't have one that all endpoints are associated to. And in that case, what you would want to use is you want to make sure that the endpoints that are doing the search are associated to the system policy that you're modifying,
Okay,
if that makes
great.
sense.
And then the other question that came up, actually, yeah, is for use in development only, can you export and share policies for download?
Yes, absolutely. So if I understand that question correctly, it's, are you able to export these, or is somebody requesting that I export a policy for them so that they can test it out in their environment?
The question was, can you export and share policies? Oh, he's asking if you can
Yep.
export and share yours.
Yeah, absolutely. 100%. We'll make that available to you at the end of the webinar, for sure.
Okay, I'm
Yeah.
typing that in just to
And
make sure that everybody sees that. And
it
then,
might actually be on our support portal. I'm not positive. I haven't checked in a little bit, but I believe our policy settings are up on there. If you look for best practice policies in the support portal, you should be able to find something.
great. We'll also make sure that you get a link to that after this webinar is done. And then one other question, and then I promise I'll turn it back over. Is there a big impact on performance in having the logs activated? Or
So
logs on?
that's a great question. So it's not so much a performance issue as it is a space issue. So it's not so much over like one person's PC versus your entire network environment where you've deployed Spirion. So what I would tell you is you're going to have to look at the resources available to the machines that you've deployed Spirion to and make that call. I can't give you, it will take up more space on your log files. And if space is an issue, then you might consider creating a system policy that is specific to a test group of endpoints so you can kind of see what's going on.
Okay, great. Thank you.
All right. Yep, of course. So policies, classification really begins in the workflow tab in our console. So we're going to go over there and we're going to take a quick look. And as you can see, I have classifications that come built in with our platform. I have modified those names a little bit because I like them to be a little bit less general. So as you can see, I have high sensitivity, medium sensitivity, low sensitivity, and public. One of the important things to realize is if you are in your console and you don't see these, the quick trick I have for you right here is you want to click this button and make sure that it's display classifications by priority. By default, when our platform installs, it's going to display rules by name. And if you don't have any rules, then it's going to show you nothing. But if you click this button right here and you go display classifications by priority, they'll magically appear for you. And just to let you know, your classifications can also be exported and imported on demand. So we're going to go through and I'm going to walk you through the process of creating a classification workflow rule. So typically what you would want to do is you would go ahead and click the rule button and we hit add. And this is going to show up under the no classification at the beginning. So I'm going to type in the classification rules. So we're going to go test classification. And one other note that I want to mention to current clients is the fact that this description field is highly underutilized from what I've seen. And I strongly recommend that this is leveraged in your environment because we all know that employees come and go and projects change hands a lot of times during the life cycle of any software solution. And these notes in that description field is really useful for helping other people get up to speed on our platform. And also just for if you're not in our platform on a day-by-day basis or day-to-day basis, it can be really helpful just to remind you what it does. So what I suggest is providing a brief description in here so that people understand what the purpose of the rule was and what the intention was. So this is a classification rule of class for demo purposes. All right, so at this point, I'm gonna go to the definitions portion tab right over here. And we're gonna talk a little bit about some of the easy operators that are available to you. What I do recommend when you're starting off with classification is that you just keep these two settings at the top set to the default. There can be certain circumstances where you might utilize some of the other ones, but majority of the time using these default settings is gonna be the ideal way to go. If you're just testing to see if the classification functionality works, one of the easiest things you could do is just type in total matches. So I can go down here and set it to something easy like greater than or equals to 1. If you want to layer more rules in, you just hit this little plus button at the end of that rule. And all of a sudden you're gonna see an operator appear and another set of filters appear below that. So the one that's typically used after that is data type. And the reason why data type, this would be the elements that comprise your classification schema. So I'm gonna use one that leverages a sensitive data definition, and we'll cover that in just a second. But I have one built to identify personal data that would fall underneath CCPA compliance. So I'm gonna go ahead and add that. And that's really all I need to do in order for this to now be in effect. So what this rule says is, and the confusing part about this is the and kind of appears above. And really, I kind of just make a mental shift and put this in between, because what it's saying is, in order for this rule to go into effect, there has to be a total match greater than or equals to 1. And the data types have to contain this sensitive data definition. We could also choose any fine definitions if we wanted. So we could go with something that's not custom, and we could say credit card number. If it contains a credit card number and there's more than one match in a document, then go ahead and classify it. So the next part is we're gonna go to the endpoint section, and we're gonna assign the workflow rule to endpoints. So this is a requirement, and there's an easy way to get around this if you're not ready to actually put this into production, and you just wanna kind of work on your classification definition. I don't have one because this is my demo environment, but you'll typically see in your environments, there's managed and unmanaged endpoints. The managed endpoints are the ones that have agents installed, and they'll show up as blue with a little green dot next to it, like this one. What I'd say, if you want to just kind of build and work on the definition, you don't want it to go into effect yet, choose an unmanaged endpoint, and that would be an endpoint on this list that shows up as gray. You can just put a check mark on that and go ahead. But for this purpose, we're gonna go ahead and say all endpoints. Then I'm gonna go to the Actions tab, and this is where I decide the classification. And I'm gonna go ahead and classify the results as medium sensitivity. And I can choose the different types of classification methods. So by default, it's gonna be set to merge the classification specified on the rule with the existing classifications, which simply means that if there's already a classification applied to that match or that location, that it will also just add another layer. And so you'll have 2 classifications applied. I'll show you what that looks like in a second. If you want the classification to just show up in the database, then leaving it as the default execute classification rules when search results are imported in the console is fine. And we can hit finish, and we should be good to go. So I'm gonna actually set up a search, and we're gonna run it and watch it classify based on our new rule. So we're gonna go ahead and go over to our policy section. I'm gonna create a quick schedule task policy. So we'll go right here, and I'm gonna call this the demo classification policy, and to show how classifications work. And finish right here. I'm going to use my 3 basic questions to configure my policy. The first one being who's going to be doing the searching. In this case, I'm going to assign it to both my endpoints. I'm going to go to the settings section under settings. And what I'm going to do is define what I'm looking for. So that's the next question. I'm going to enable credit cards because I know that's what we put into our workflow definition. So I'm going to go to credit card numbers, enable the any find definition there. And then what I'm going to do is ask myself the final question to configure my policy, which is where am I searching? And that's going to be under the location section of the policy. So I go to locations and I go to files because it's a file location that I'm searching. I'm going to enable file search. And then I'm going to set the scope to just be on a custom folder on my demo machine. The last part is I'm going to define where that custom folder is. And the reason I'm going to do that is I just want to show in a quick search. So I'm going to go here and I'm going to go up to my demo data 2017, pull this folder path out. And I'm going to go ahead and throw that into the custom folders location of the policy. Being mindful that the default sets to exclude, we're going to flip that over to include. And I'm ready to start my search, and we should see that the classifications are applied to the results on this search. So I'm going to schedule the task, classification test, workstations, and it's 5/7. So I'm going to go ahead and put that in there as well so I remember what date I kicked this off on. We set it to stop all instances, run as soon as possible, always run. And a best practice when you are doing your searches or test searches and things like that, I do recommend that you put in an expiration date for that task so that the chances of it ever kicking off again go down to 0. So I'm going to hit OK. And then I'm going to go over to my status tab, select my endpoints so that I can see how they do with this search. And the first tab I'm going to go to see how the search is running is I'm going to go to my scheduled searches. I can hit refresh. And what I'm really looking for is this little play button to appear, because once that appears, I know that the search task has been picked up and it's ready to go check out the searches in progress. So this should be a relatively quick search. I'm going to hit refresh. And they both picked it up already. I can see that this one's already found matches. So I should have results here. The other one we're going to give a couple seconds to, and then we should also have matches and should report back to the console. Just to let you know, I tend to be somebody who's kind of one of those rapid clickers on everything because I feel like it gives me more control and I fast speeds things up. But the truth of the matter is this is generally set to a 5-minute update interval, so it doesn't do anything other than keep me busy. The next tab I'm going to go to is my uploads tab, just to verify that the upload is there before I try to review the results. So I'm going to go ahead and hit refresh, and I see that 8:37 p.m. Not sure what time zone this computer is set to, but we'll look at here. Looks like I got one of the uploads. Once you see that state is done on that upload, that's when you know that you can go check it in the results tab. You'll see uploads go to 3 states. Those states are uploaded, which means the results came to the IIS server. Then you'll see it go into a processing state, which means it's being sent over to the database server. And when it says done, that means it's in the database at that time. So I'm going to go ahead and hit refresh. Oh, it looks like I missed the other one came in earlier, so 8:36. So now I can go to my results tab. And what I should see is I'm going to go ahead and filter by searches. And I'm going to say the classification test 1 is the one I care about. And you can see my classifications have applied here on the column to the right. So we can kind of click into this. It looks like I had another workflow rule. And you can see that the console was the one who applied the classification. What's interesting to note is that if end user was the one who had applied the classification, it would surface itself right here in the results. So when you click the results details, you would see that the origin would be end user versus or user assigned versus console assigned. So you can kind of see that part right there. But at this point, you will notice that obviously our classifications haven't applied to our demo data set. So the next step that I'm going to show you is we're going to now change it over to applying the classification to the metadata of the file itself. So in order for that to happen, of course, what you would want to do at this point is review your results to make sure that that aligned with what you were expecting and make your adjustments as necessary. So adding more criteria in. But once that's been done, I'm going to go ahead, go back to my policies. I'm going to go to settings, and I'm going to again modify my base system policy to put this in action. And now what we're going to do is go to classifications, and we're going to go ahead and instead of having it just classify within the console only, I want it to classify in the console and apply the tag and the metadata, and we'll take a look at that in a second. So I'm going to hit OK. I'm going to also make some small changes in my workflow. So the first thing I'm going to do is, because I don't really want to see this, I'm going to go ahead and remove my public classification. And we're going to go back to this one. And the only change I'm going to make on my workflow rule, if I want the classifications to appear on the metadata tag, is I'm going to specify that it needs to execute the classification rules directly on the endpoint, like so. Hit finish. And now I'm going to go back and run the same search that we just ran a second ago again, so you can see the classifications apply to the actual metadata itself. So we'll set up another one. Let's see, I have my, all right, I will go ahead and create another policy for this. So testing persistent classifications. And again, this is for demo purposes. I'm going to hit finish. I'm going to decide who's doing the search. It's going to be all endpoints. I'm going to ask myself, what am I searching for? Which is going to fall under the identity section. Credit card numbers. Oh. And the last part is we obviously know this is a file location. It's going to be scoped to that custom folder. And I'm going to go ahead and add that folder path again right here. Now remember, one of the important things to realize is that in order for end user to be able to see the classification, they do need to have an agent installed on their device that has, it needs to be built with an MSI that has allowed for the Explorer integration. Otherwise, they would not see it. However, the classification tag is still there on the file regardless. So we'll talk about why that might be important if we have some time at the end, but I'm going to go ahead and put this into motion. And I'll be mindful of removing my old task so it doesn't accidentally get picked up. And we're going to go here. I'm going to add a new search in. Leaving it all at the defaults, except for I'm going to stop all instances because this is the most important search right now and run it as soon as possible.
Someone just pointed out that you still had that path set as exclude from search.
Ah, well, someone just saved me some embarrassment. So thank you so much for catching that. I appreciate that.
You know who you are, someone.
Thank you. It's always good to have a second pair of eyes. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and set this one to go. And we're going to stop all instances of Spirion and let it run as soon as possible. I'll be mindful to set my expiration date so this doesn't accidentally kick off some other day if I re-up my policies. And I'm going to go back to my status tab and we'll make sure everything goes. So I can see it processing. When you see the orange appear next to the status of your endpoint, that means that your endpoint is processing something new. Okay, and it looks like the HR computer picked it up. And I'm assuming the accounting computer will pick it up as well. There we go. So now I can go to my searches in progress. And it looks like my accounting computers or my HR computer is already done. And I am remembering correctly, I think we're actually looking at the, all right, so now it's going to be set. You can see the upload come in. And there's the uploading. And as soon as it gets processed, then we should be able to see it. One other important note that I want to mention is if this isn't happening for you, some things that you might want to pay attention to is what service tasks are running on the back end. Because in order for your classification to apply, the run workflow rule service task should be running after your search is done. So the search is done first, and then the workflows are executed secondary to that. So at this point, we can actually minimize our screen, and you can see the classifications have applied to the files themselves. If we want to, we can go to the property section and go to our classification, and we can see that it's checked right here. Now, I've enabled the Explorer integration so that my end users could basically change the classifications at will. But at this point, we would also see that in the Spirion console, if we were to filter on that search that we just ran, that the classifications have applied. So looks like my other upload hasn't finished processing yet, but we'll go ahead and take a look at this one. And here's my results with my classification applied to it as well. All right, so some other things that I'm just going to give you quick tips and tricks on is for things like CCPA and if you have multiple compliance initiatives that you're trying to accomplish, classification can be a great way to sort on those different types of things. One of the things that I do is I'll create sensitive data definitions so that my classification workflow rules are somewhat simpler. So for example, if we go to our admin tab and we go down to sensitive data types, I can take a look at like PCI DSS or personal data CCPA. So let's look at that one. And this is not fully comprehensive, but basically I chose a bunch of different data elements that would fall under CCPA personal data. And this is just an idea on how you could lay this out so that you can classify data that would fall under CCPA and then separate it from maybe data that is PCI DSS. And your workflow rules become much simpler if you do it that way, because you can go right here and say total matches is greater than 1 and the data type contains this big sensitive data definition. It's a much cleaner way. Sorry, Sandra, do you have something?
Oh, sorry, I was saying as in yes, but I actually have a lot of questions. Go ahead and finish up what you're talking about, and then I'll jump in on some of those questions.
Okay, so the last part I'm going to give you is some of the things that I've seen a lot of our current clients doing that are successful with classifications. So other operators that I've seen utilize quite a bit are things like location. The one thing that I want to mention about location, I'm using this as a filter criteria, is that what I generally will recommend is that it always begins with and not contains. You'd be surprised if you use contains, because I've seen this quite often where somebody says $, they'll do a recycle bin, and they'll say, well, that's the recycle bin. The problem with this is that you'll classify things that aren't in people's recycle bin, and you'll get confused as to why that happened. It's simply because you chose the contains. So to play things safe, I generally recommend begins with. Ends up being usually a lot better and more accurate. And if you wanted to limit this to specific searches, the other filter criteria that gets widely used is task name. And again, I would be careful with this, but that means that you built a safety into this workflow rule where it won't execute unless you name the task specifically, beginning with something like monthly personal data search. So that's a recommendation, is that you do build some safety into your, especially if you plan on then taking that and moving it over to remediation steps like shred or redact. What I generally recommend is if you do want to work to automated remediation, that you would follow this process of, let's go ahead and first classify the results in the database, validate them there, then let your end user see what would be shredded by enabling classifications at the file level so they can see the metadata tag being applied. And then once people kind of get used to seeing that, letting them know, hey, we're going to be in the next month or so, we're going to be starting a remediation process. So please let us know if files have been misclassified or things like that. So that's all I have. At this point, we are definitely open to questions or comments or
I have
anything
a
else
I have
that,
a bunch of questions for you, Kyle. So
okay, fire
let's jump
away.
right on in. The first one, and this is actually a couple of different people asked this in different ways. So for those of you who asked this question, if I missed something, please let me know. But the basic idea is, how do you deal with false positives? When you create a big honeypot like you just did, you're probably going to end up with some false positives in there. How do you mitigate for that?
So that's a great question, and I would say that's an awesome topic for one of our next webinars. But the thing that I will tell you is, because I'm not going to try to avoid the question, because I think that's a really important one, is that if you notice the way that I've laid out this sensitive data definition, it ends up being that you're going to actually deal with a lot less results than you're typically maybe used to seeing if you're using any fine definitions. And that's because of the way that I laid it out. If you notice, when I have it here, you'll see social security number greater than or equals to 1. What this effectively does is it returns results only at the file level. It doesn't show me every single match that's in a document, because when I'm building a data inventory, I don't really care if a document has 5,000 matches in it or if it only has 2 matches in it. It's still personal data and should be classified appropriately. So it's kind of separating it out in the way that I'm going to only look at files when I set up sensitive data definitions that way. That's going to help a lot. And then it allows me to kind of get a more holistic view from the top and be able to make decisions on potentially locations to ignore. If I need to remediate false positives past that point, what I can do is add some custom regular expressions in, and also layer more sensitive data definitions into this so that it does become more customized for my environment. But I would recommend, if you've never tried this, to try to build a sensitive data definition similar to this, run it, and you'll see kind of what I'm talking about. It's a significant difference in the way that your results will be returned. And I would say a lot of our successful clients are implementing sensitive data definitions, but
Do
that's
we
a
have
big
any
topic.
help? Do we have any help on building sensitive data definitions for people?
Yes, so there are support articles that will definitely help improve your knowledge on sensitive data definitions. There's a couple websites I can recommend, so I'll put notes together at the end of this that we'll distribute. But if you've never had any experience with regular expressions, the one that I always recommend to clients is regex1. It's about a 15-minute tutorial, and you can learn regular expressions in literally 15 minutes if you go to this website and just go through from the beginning to end. I promise that should be enough that you kind of get the idea of regular expressions and can implement them into using operators like, so you can take this one, and instead of having the greater than or equals to, you could switch it over to a regular expression and say it needs to be less than 1 match of the regular expression that was like something you're seeing that you wanted to exclude.
Okay, great. How does all this classification work if we have multiple discovery teams used in the environment? Any differences?
Not really. So the one difference that you might, if you're doing it remote, like this is more for workstations, but if you wanted to create it for remote, that's not a problem. One nice thing, like if you're doing remote target searching, is you can basically take the rule, clone it, and if it's on, I always go test classification rule. Oh, I can't spell remote. Right there. All right. And I flip it over to the actions or the endpoints to use the endpoints from which the search was performed rather than on which the results were found. So that's an important note, that when you are creating these workflow rules, you set up one for remote searching and one for local searching. So it's a good question.
Yeah.
Obviously, if you want to apply a metadata tag, it will apply, but if there isn't an agent on that file server, or I don't have an agent installed on my machine when I'm looking at that file share, I'm not going to see the classification appear in my File Explorer window.
Okay. I think we have one more time for one more question, and then the rest, everybody will make sure that Kyle sees these and that we get answers, and that'll be part of the documentation that we send out once this follows. But there is one more that I wanted to address here. Do we have any file classification integration options for cloud services like OneDrive, Dropbox, G Suite, anything along those lines?
So that's an interesting question, and one that, believe it or not, I've not actually done a lot of testing, or so I would have to get back to that individual
Okay.
on that question. So I
Well,
apologize.
yeah,
I'm not
I
positive on
don't
that.
know the answer
Um,
either, so we'll make sure to get that answer for them.
it's a good question though.
Hmm.
I know that we do have an Exchange integration, and we do have an Office integration that allows you to manipulate set classifications inside those programs natively. So, or with
And
an add-on.
if you do have classifications that are integrations that you're interested in, by all means tell your customer service manager. And if you don't know who your customer service manager is, reach out to us and we'll tell you.
Yeah.
So that we definitely want to give you the things that you want and need. There are other questions, but we have one like little follow-up ending here, so we're going to go ahead and finish up.
Yep.
Any of the questions that didn't get answered, we'll make sure to answer in our follow-up here in just a few days. Could you put that last slide up for us?
Yep. Absolutely. It looks like it went to the very beginning.
Of
So
course it does.
let me get you all the way to the end. Oh,
Oop,
that's
back
too
up.
far.
One more. Okay,
All
so
right.
another thing, just that we want to make sure, if you have other questions about this, two things. Number one, if you have not used the customer portal, the new customer portal that we have at myguide.spirion.com, you absolutely should. If you haven't gotten an email that says specifically that you have access to this, just reach out to your customer success manager and we'll make sure to set you up with access to this new customer portal. Out there, you'll find that we have online training that is available to you. That's something that we have not had before, and we actually have a course on classification. We also have forums where you can talk about classification with people. So you can get feedback from experts as well as from the people here at Spirion. And then our knowledge base and our tickets are migrating over there as well. So make sure that you go out there. The other thing is, we are just now building a course that is a deeper dive into classification and what you can do with classification. So if you have other questions, please, by all means, either feel free to reach out to us directly, talk to your customer success manager, or actually in your responses to the survey that comes out from this, let us know what your questions are so we can make sure to answer those in your training that's coming up soon. That is all that I had. Kyle, is there any last thing that you'd like to say?
No, thank you so much for taking the time to meet with us today. We really appreciate it, and hope you guys have a great rest of your week.
All right. Hey, thanks everybody. Enjoy. We'll talk to you again very soon. Bye-bye.